Well, good morning, and welcome to Grace Church on the Hill. And good morning to you, David.
Good morning, Micah. Good to be here.
Yeah. This is David Beadle, who is a student at Wycliffe and with us this semester. And we are doing our third in a series of 6, I believe, conversations about different reflections of the light of Christ in artwork. And David has selected a poem that may be familiar to some of you, a poem that I read in Advent and like quite a bit. And I'll let him introduce it and read it for us.
Sure. So the poem is called For the Time Being, and there is a section for Advent. There's also a section for Epiphany, which we're going through right now. And it's a short section, and it sort of describes a scene from the 3 wise men, as we call them, who see the star. And should I just go ahead and read it for us?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. So this section's called The Summons. And first, from the star of the Nativity speaking. I am that star most dreaded by the wise. They are drawn against their will to me, yet read in my procession through the skies, the doom of orthodox Sophrosiny. I shall discard their major preservation, all that they know so long as no one asks. I shall deprive them of their minor tasks. In free and legal households of sensation, of money, picnics, beer, and sanitation. Beware, all those who follow me are led onto that glassy mountain where there are no footholds for logic, to that bridge of dread, where knowledge but increases vertigo. Those who pursue me take a twisting lane to find themselves immediately alone, with savage water or unfeeling stone, in labyrinths where they must entertain confusion, cripples, tigers, thunder, pain. The first wise man. To break down her defenses and profit from the vision that plain men can predict through an ascesis of their senses. With rack and screw I put nature through a thorough inquisition. But she was so afraid that if I were disappointed, I should hurt her more than her answers were disjointed. I did, I didn't, I will, I won't. She is just as big a liar, in fact, as we are. To discover how to be truthful now is the reason I follow this star. The second wise man. My faith that in time's constant flow lay real assurance broke down on this analysis. At any given instant, all solids dissolve, no wheels revolve, and facts have no endurance. And who knows if it is by design or pure inadvertence that the present destroys its inherited self-importance. With envy, terror, rage, regret, we anticipate or remember but never are. To discover how to be living now is the reason I follow this star. The third wise man. Observing how myopic is the Venus of the Soma, the concept ought would make, I thought, our passions philanthropic, and rectify in the sensual eye both lens flare and lens coma, but arriving at the greatest good by introspection and counting the greater number left no time for affection. Laughter, kisses, squeezing, smiles. And I learned why the learned are as despised as they are. To discover how to be loving now is the reason I follow this star. The 3 wise men together. The weather has been awful. The countryside is dreary. Marsh, jungle, rock. and echoes mock, calling our hope unlawful. But a silly song can help along, yours ever and sincerely. At least we know for certain that we are three old sinners, that this journey is much too long, and that we want our dinners, and miss our wives, our books, and our dogs, but have only the vaguest idea what we are, why we are what we are. To discover how to be human now is the reason we follow the star.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the ending there where Auden kind of brings those three motivations of the wise men together and says to discover how to be human now is the reason we follow this star. I also appreciate how each wise man seems to have a different personality and different motivation, and they seem quite serious about their tasks, but then at the end in that chorus they come off a little bit lighter. We want our dinners, miss our wives.
Yeah. It's I think there are a lot of ironies in this little bit. Obviously one of them is, like, for example, right now we're in Epiphany, we're talking about the light of Christ, right? And that's what this poem is about. And the wise men are seeing the star, they're seeing the light, being led to the light, of course. And yet it's awfully dark and dreary, almost disappointing and certainly unexpected, you know? And this sort of conclusion that we come to, like that you just brought up, is ironic. We miss the journey's too long. We want our dinners. We miss our wives, our books, our dogs. We haven't the vaguest idea of who we are, why we are what we are. You know, and I think that this is like the ironic twist that it's nevertheless profoundly true, and I think brilliantly captured. It's that what these wise men are, I guess, needing to find out or needing to learn requires their self-denial, the emptying of their control, of their mastery. So really, in this like ironic or this tension between like darkness and difficulty and confusion, they actually are finding or beginning to find the light or true wisdom, or what they seek.
Yeah, there's a sense of aimlessness and kind of confusion about where they're going, and then also I think a certain tangibleness to discover how to be human, and of course they'll come to the human God in Jesus. Later in the poem, they'll come to see the child. But I'm wondering if maybe this is a good point to just talk about your own journey and what brought you to Grace Church and to studying for ministry, and what that kind of, in its own way, seems kind of like a journey to this child. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I am from Louisiana, southern Louisiana and Texas. Texas after I was 14. It's an interesting question, though. To bring my journey into sort of this world of the Magi searching for Christ. That's an interesting question. I guess my story, briefly, how I'm here, is I was born and raised in a very charismatic, non-denominational environment, very devout parents, and that was kind of my world for the vast majority of my life, only until about 5 or 6 years ago. So even after I was married to my wife, Brittany, we were still sort of in that world, which I'm very thankful for. And I'm just trying, it's a very interesting like exercise even. I'm trying to like piece it together. I mean, if I were to like explain what I understood my religious experience, my like knowledge of Christ, or how I encountered, experienced, or expressed my faith, I would have certainly maybe prioritized things such as emotion, which is not bad. Spiritual feeling, or some. This is kind of the words I would use, and a lot of people would use, and experience and things like that. Also, I would say that might relate to the second wise man, the wise man who talks about, he sort of goes on this. Well, we can get into this a little bit later, but he kind of goes on to this like existentialist rift, right?
How to be living.
How to be living, yeah, exactly. How to discover how to be living now. It's an interesting question, and I would say if I were to like place myself there as one of these men on this journey looking for Christ,
maybe number two.
Maybe number two, yeah,
okay.
Because there was experience is just so important for that, and it was for me, and also I would include like the charismatic movement comes out of the holiness movement, what we would call the holiness movement from Methodism and American revivals, early 1900s, and so experience, but also like a very intentional shape of like moral life was very, very important. So those two things. Now, I find myself through a longer story that I'm, happy to share when there's more time. But I would say I found myself coming to Anglicanism broadly in the Episcopal Church, specifically because whereas experience and moral life were important, I had become drawn to, or felt like I was maybe missing, the greater tradition, history of the people of God that I could be sort of thrown into and re-rooted within. I found that the liturgy, in a way, offered a structure for both experience and like embodied action. I could worship with my senses and those sorts of things. So, yeah, and I went through the process of discernment like you and like so many others that I'm still going through right now. And I was sent to seminary in Toronto because my bishop loves Wycliffe, and he used to be the principal at Wycliffe. He's now down in Dallas. And I also love it. And so, anyways, that's how I find myself in Toronto, and I'm doing a placement like everyone in seminary has to do, but I'm lucky enough to be at Grace Church.
Yeah, well, we're glad your journey brought you here. I'm struck by just that hearing a little bit about your journey from kind of more experientially driven worship and that kind of faith. Just thinking a little bit about W.H. Auden and a little bit of what was going on in his life. He had his own journey, I think. I believe he was raised in the Church of England, and I know he kind of rejected that and was a really popular left-wing poet, and I'm pretty sure he went to the Spanish Civil War on the side of the anarchists, and but then kind of got disillusioned with all that, and at this point, I think this is 1942, it's World War II, and he's found his way back into the Christian fold, and I don't know if he would be Wiseman number 2, or just from his own biography, I'm tempted to say he'd be number 3, because he seems like he's struggling with how to be loving. Kind of led a bohemian life, and that led to some difficult experiences for him, and obviously it's not always good to read too much into a poem like this, but I think
it's certainly relevant.
Tempted to see a little bit of autobiography peeking through there.
it's interesting, like, to find or locate ourselves and our journeys with one of these wise men. But I think also, if we look back at what the star kind of opens with, I am the star most dreaded by the wise. And this obviously includes all three wise men. There's something that I think Auden is getting at with all three of these wise men. So, like, for example, first wise man, to break down her defenses and profit from the vision that plain men can predict through an ascesis of their senses. With rack and screw, I put nature through a thorough inquisition. I mean, we know these people. We are these people, I sort of scribbled down that this reminds me of the idealist, the idealist, the person who, he says ascesis, which is sort of a withdrawal from, ascesis of the senses, to get away from the things I can touch and feel, to get into my mind, to find in, like, the structures of logic or something that I can really, like, solve truth, right? So I kind of scribbled down, this is the idealist, right? A lot of us have a bit of a tinge of the idealist in us, And then the second wise man, like we've already brought up, brings up all of these strange comments about time. I had faith in time's constant flow. There was sort of, for him, was a sort of, there was a solidity, a foundation, an easiness about, things will keep going. It'll be okay. But then he realizes that at any given instant, it can all go astray, right? And he has this strange line that when he says, this is what he discovered, that the present destroys its inherited self-importance. And then 2 lines later, we anticipate or remember, but we never are. And this is, I scribbled down here that this is the existentialist, which is, I think, fairly obvious. He's bringing up a point that Kierkegaard brought up as well, not to get too out in left field here, but it's simply this, is that, at one moment we find ourselves sort of comfortable in the easy flow of our lives. And then there's this, like, haunting thought that comes to us where we try to capture the present moment, our present lives, what we're actually doing right now. And obviously the problem with that is, as soon as I think about my present moment, it's become my past. And I can try to get ahead of it in anticipation, or what we might call hope. So there's memory and there's anticipation. But when I'm looking forward and trying to grasp it, it's still in front of me. And once it happens, it's then behind me. And so we're sort of like flying through this life. And Kierkegaard, like, just has characters go mad about this, And so, this is the quintessential existentialist concern. So we have the idealist, the wise man 1. We have the existentialist, wise man 2, who's looking to learn how to live. How can I possibly live? These are the questions the existentialist asks.
What about number 3?
Oh, number 3. Number 3, I wrote down the ethicist.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at the 3rd line, and by the way, you guys can Google this, or we can put it up or something.
Yeah, we'll put it up.
Okay, we'll put the poem up. Great. The concept, capital O, ought, would make, I thought, our passions philanthropic, and rectify the sensual eye, etc., by arriving at the greatest good by introspection, and counting the greater number, left no time for affection. So I put here the ethicist.
Just wanted to continue that line. Laughter, kisses, squeezing smiles. I love how tangible that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the point is that this view of ought, of duty, right, or maybe like pure duty, it has nothing to say to laughter, kisses, squeezing, smiles.
Which are, of course, the main things that we do with our lives. They're not, we're not out there formulating how to be a good person most of the time. We're, changing diapers or
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yes. Or potty training.
Potty training, yeah. What's the ethics there?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a great point, right? Even the kind of, again, not to get too like out in left field here. It's not. I don't think it has to be that complicated. The kind of ethics that he's talking about are sort of like mere duty, capital O, ought, what I ought to do. I expected that if I'd gotten that right, it would have turned the other stuff, what we might call the passions, the emotions, the zest of life. It would have tamed it, brought it under control, but it didn't. Because it has nothing to say to all of those aspects of our lives, which, make it worth living. Even when he talks about the greater good, the greatest good, and the greater number, he's talking about these moralities that try to determine how I should live and how I should act based on like mathematical numbers and equations. He's just failed to capture what...
It's impersonal, yeah.
Yeah, it's impersonal.
Well, I was struck just thinking about our own time right now in the pandemic. How these problems feel kind of acute, like this problem of truthfulness, and so much of our lives right now are lived on screens, and there's a sense of kind of surreality to things. And then with time, of course, I think all of us have this sense that like we're not even sure what day it is, much less what month it is. And then that one about loving, I think I personally have found it a pretty weird disjunction of like knowing that there's a lot of pain happening and just people suffering from loss of jobs and loss of loved ones, but also feeling really isolated from that hurt, and not knowing what I personally can do to love someone who might have lost a family member to COVID. So I think it's interesting to read these because in some way they feel like very cerebral and kind of wise men's problems, not normal people's problems. But I think
they certainly are.
Yeah, they're problems I think I've been feeling too.
Well, that's a really good point, and I think it's relevant because, like, we can go down the list, but the problems here, the wise men, and they're seeing, of course, they're seeing their problems here, right? They're acknowledging, like, I was looking for this, I've come up short, and now I'm following the star to find out, right? And the thing is, like, and this totally relates to what we're going through. The solution, if you will, is this radical willingness to abandon and to follow where God leads, to find Christ, right? And that is not an idea, right? It's not an ethical formula, right? It doesn't solve the issue of time and the present and the past and the future. It simply leads you tangibly, really, with bruises and scars, to find the God child, And one of the things about the pandemic is that, like, I think at this point, none of us are imagining or would even try to pretend like we haven't lost something. We've lost quite a lot. I mean, that's to say nothing of the real lives that we've lost, but we've lost, our ability to be present with one another truly, physically, to touch, to kiss, to hug, to squeeze, all of those things. I mean, in a way, we're sort of confined to the former means of the wise men, to thinking about one another, or having each other in our hearts, or whatever language we're trying to conjure up to sort of justify how we can get on living. But I also want to say this, that it's not like our attempts at getting on living in such a truncated world that constricted world that we're living in right now, nevertheless express something, and that is our deep desire to love, to touch, to kiss, to feel, to squeeze. And there is something to that. That these means are very limited, they're constricting, but we're nevertheless like trying to push through them to find like our own humanity and the humanity of those that we love and that we miss, we care for, trying to have conversation, trying to have communion together, trying to in some way to connect. I mean, these are good things.
Yeah.
You know,
we too are trying to discover how to be human now in this time, and yeah, I think one of my hopes for whatever lies after the pandemic is that we can get a clearer sense of how to be human with each other when we are back in person.
I wonder. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I do like wonder about like the normal things that we used to do. And I think, man, how did I take that for granted? You know, and it's kind of like I'm scared. I'm genuinely scared that I'm going to do it again, that I'm going to take it for granted. You know, a church packed full of people for a baptism. You know, having a birthday party. You know, things like that. I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, man, like how did I ever lose the moment?
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Well, I think we should wrap things up here, but thanks for introducing us to this poem and reflecting. It's been good.
Yeah, indeed. Happy to be here.
Yeah. See you all next week for another installment. Peace.